Nathan Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the ambulance sped down the dimly lit streets of Chicago. The city, normally alive with honking taxis and bustling pedestrians, was eerily quiet. Too quiet. His partner, Luis Martinez, sat beside him, listening intently to the emergency radio. Reports of riots, violent attacks, and people losing their minds flooded the frequency. "This is insane," Luis muttered, adjusting his glasses. "Dispatch says people are eating each other." "Like, actually eating each other." Nathan exhaled sharply. "Drugs. Some new kind of synthetic garbage. I've seen it before." But deep down, something felt different. He could sense it in the air, the way the city seemed to be holding its breath. The call that had sent them racing through the streets was an emergency at a downtown apartment complex. A man had been bitten and was losing a dangerous amount of blood. Nothing they hadn't handled before. As they pulled up to the building, chaos unfolded before them. People ran screaming in all directions. A man in a bloodied business suit sprinted across the street, chased by Nathan's stomach twisted, a woman with gaping wounds on her arms, her mouth smeared with crimson. "Jesus Christ," Luis whispered. Nathan grabbed his medical bag and jumped out. "Come on." The victims inside. They rushed into the apartment building, the scent of copper thick in the air. The stairwell was a mess of overturned furniture, discarded shoes, and bloody smears along the walls. The victim lay sprawled in the hallway, pale, gasping, clutching a shredded arm. Nathan dropped to his knees. "Hey, stay with me. We've got you." The man's eyes fluttered open. "She bit me," he rasped. She just wouldn't stop." Nathan pressed gauze to the wound, but the skin around it was turning an unnatural gray. "Luis, we need to move. Get the stretcher." Luis turned to grab it, then froze. A figure stumbled toward them from the shadows at the end of the hallway. A woman. Her mouth slack, eyes milky white. Blood dripped from her chin. She wasn't running. She wasn't screaming. She was hunting. Then, without warning, she lunged. Nathan barely had time to react. He shoved the stretcher between them, sending the woman tumbling back, but she scrambled to her feet unnaturally fast. "Get the hell out of here!" Luis shouted, yanking Nathan's arm. They sprinted toward the exit, but the sound of pounding footsteps echoed behind them. The woman wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the darkness, half a dozen, their flesh torn and rotting. Nathan slammed into the stairwell door, shoving it open. "Move, move, move." They bolted down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. The undead pursued, their guttural moans reverberating through the narrow space. The ambulance was just outside. If they could make it. A piercing scream rang out. Nathan turned. The victim, the man they had tried to save, was convulsing violently. His skin darkened, veins bulging. Then, with a sickening crack, his body twisted unnaturally, and his eyes snapped open, milky and empty. He wasn't dying. He was turning. Nathan barely had time to comprehend what was happening before the man lunged, sinking his teeth into Luis's arm. Luis screamed. Nathan grabbed his partner and pulled him back, but blood was already gushing from the wound. "No, no, no," Nathan muttered, dragging Luis toward the exit. The ambulance was their only chance. But as they burst through the doors, Nathan's heart sank. The streets were no longer empty. A horde of the undead shuffled toward them, their numbers growing. The city was falling. And there was nowhere left to run. Nathan tightened his grip on Luis, hauling him toward the ambulance as the undead closed in. The streetlights flickered, casting long, twisted shadows over the writhing mass of bodies. Some shambled, their broken limbs barely able to support them. Others moved faster, jerking forward with terrifying speed. Luis groaned, blood pouring from the deep bite on his forearm. His breathing was ragged. "Stay with me, man," Nathan panted, reaching the ambulance. He shoved the door open and pulled Luis inside. Nathan slammed the doors just as the first zombie reached them. The creature flung itself against the vehicle, its bloodied hands smearing the glass. Shit! Nathan scrambled into the driver's seat, shoving the key into the ignition. The ambulance roared to life. The first zombie wasn't alone. More of them slammed into the sides, their teeth gnashing, their soulless eyes fixed on the fresh meat inside. The weight of the horde rocked the vehicle. Nathan gritted his teeth and stomped on the gas. The ambulance lurched forward, tires screeching as it plowed through the growing sea of undead. Bodies thumped against the hood, rolling off as he swerved down the nearest street. "Luis, talk to me!" Nathan shouted, glancing back. Luis was slumped against the seat, his face pale, sweat beading along his forehead. His breathing was fast and shallow. "B. Burns," Luis gasped. "Feels like my blood's on fire." Nathan's stomach twisted. He'd seen enough horror movies to know what a zombie bite meant. But this wasn't a movie. This was real, and Luis was his best friend. "You're gonna be okay," Nathan lied. The city was falling apart around them. Fires raged in the distance. A helicopter roared overhead, searchlights scanning the streets, but it didn't stop. It was leaving, just like everyone else who had the means to escape. Nathan turned onto Michigan Avenue, only to slam on the brakes. The bridge leading out of the city was gone. Blown apart. What the hell? Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. Military vehicles were stationed on the far side, their flashing red and blue lights barely visible through the smoke. It wasn't just the bridge, the entire perimeter of the city was being sealed off. "They're locking us in," he whispered. A realization hit him like a freight train. No one was coming to save them. A loud bang jolted Nathan back to the present. A hand slapped against the driver's side window. A woman. She was alive. "Hey! Please, let me in," she screamed, her voice hoarse from desperation. Behind her, two more people ran toward the ambulance, a man and a little girl, no older than 10. Nathan hesitated. Luis groaned again, his skin taking on a sickly gray tint. "Nate," Luis rasped. Don't let me turn." Nathan clenched his jaw. "Don't talk like that." The woman outside pounded the window. "They're coming. Please." Nathan's gaze flicked to the side mirror. More zombies were spilling into the street, drawn by the noise. He made his decision. Nathan flung the door open and jumped out. The woman grabbed his arm, eyes wide with relief. "Get in," he ordered. The man scooped the little girl into his arms and dove into the back of the ambulance, followed closely by the woman. Nathan barely had time to slam the doors before the first zombie lunged at him. He ducked, shoving the creature back, then scrambled into the driver's seat and hit the gas. The ambulance rocketed forward. For now, they were safe. But not for long. Inside the ambulance, Nathan stole a glance at his new passengers. The woman was in her late 20s, dressed in jeans and a torn hoodie. Her hands were shaking. "I'm Rachel," she breathed. "This is Jason, and that's his daughter, Emily." Jason was older, mid-30s, with a strong build. Emily clung to his side, her tear-streaked face buried in his chest. "I'm Nathan," he said. "That's Luis." Rachel's eyes flickered to Luis, who was barely conscious. Her expression darkened. He was bitten. It wasn't a question. Nathan exhaled sharply. "Yeah." Jason tensed, holding Emily closer. "Then he's as good as dead." Nathan's hands gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "We're not giving up on him." Rachel and Jason exchanged a look. "Look," Rachel said carefully, "I know you want to save your friend, but I've seen what happens. My brother was bitten. He lasted 2 hours before he changed." Luis groaned, shifting slightly. His skin was clammy. "We need to find shelter," Nathan said firmly, changing the subject. "Doesn't matter what's happening, people have to be hiding somewhere." "There's a store nearby," Jason said. I saw some survivors barricade themselves inside before we ran into you. Nathan nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a plan. They drove in tense silence. Outside, the city burned. Sirens wailed in the distance, but there was no cavalry coming. Luis coughed violently, and Nathan flinched. Time was running out. The store. They reached the store, a small convenience shop with the windows hastily boarded up. Jason banged on the door. "Hey! Let us in." No response. Nathan turned. The horde was coming. "Open the damn door!" Rachel shouted. Inside, someone moved. A shadow behind the boards. Then, after an agonizing moment, the lock clicked. A man with a shotgun cracked the door open. "Get in. Now." They rushed inside, the door slamming behind them. They weren't alone. Inside the store, 5 other survivors stared at them. Some with fear. Some with suspicion. A moment of silence passed before the shotgun-wielding man spoke. "Welcome to hell." The door slammed shut behind them, and the heavy clank of a deadbolt echoed in the tense silence. Nathan's breath came in ragged gasps as he took in their surroundings. The convenience store had been hastily converted into a makeshift stronghold. Shelves were shoved against the windows, their contents long since looted. A handful of flickering lanterns provided dim lighting, casting jagged shadows along the walls. The man with the shotgun, a bearded guy in his late 40s, narrowed his eyes at them. "Anyone bit?" Jason immediately pointed at Luis. Nathan stepped in front of his partner. "He's not turning." The man's face hardened. "You sure about that?" Luis barely stirred, his skin slick with sweat. He was getting worse. "Look, we don't want trouble," Nathan said. "We just need a place to rest and figure out our next move." A woman in her 50s, with graying hair and a pistol at her hip, scoffed. "Next move? Ain't no next move. City's locked down. Ain't nobody getting out." Rachel crossed her arms. "You don't know that for sure." "Yeah?" The woman pointed out the boarded-up windows. "Bridges are gone, roads are blocked, and every way out of this city is crawling with those damn things. Face it, honey, we're trapped." Nathan clenched his jaw. They hadn't seen the worst of it yet, but these people had. "Who else is here?" Jason asked, scanning the room. There were 3 others, besides the man with the shotgun and the older woman. A young couple huddled in a corner, whispering to each other, their faces gaunt and fearful. Then there was a kid, maybe 17, gripping a baseball bat like his life depended on it. "We didn't catch your name," Rachel said to the man with the shotgun. He exhaled through his nose. "Dale." He nodded toward the older woman. "That's Linda. The kids over there are Ben and Carrie." "And the quiet one?" "That's Trey." Trey barely reacted. His grip tightened on the bat, but he kept his gaze on the floor. Nathan nodded. "I'm Nathan. This is Rachel, Jason, Emily, and," he hesitated. "And Luis." Dale's gaze flicked to Luis again. "How long ago was he bit?" Nathan didn't answer. "Figured," Dale muttered. Luis groaned. His breathing was shallow. Nathan ignored the tension in the room and focused on what mattered. "How much food do you have left?" Linda sighed. "Not enough." Jason tensed. "So what, you're just waiting to starve?" "No," Dale said, shifting his grip on the shotgun. "We've been planning a supply run." Nathan's pulse quickened. "Where?" Dale motioned toward a map pinned to the wall. "There's a department store 2 blocks over. Big place. It got looted early, but there's a storage room in the back that might still have supplies. Problem is, it's crawling with those things." Rachel studied the map. "If we're fast, we can be in and out before they swarm us." Linda frowned. "You volunteering?" Rachel nodded. "So am I," Nathan said. Jason hesitated. "I should stay with Emily." Nathan turned to Dale. You coming? The older man exhaled sharply. Someone's gotta watch this place. But Trey will go. The kid finally looked up. Wait, what? Dale handed him a crowbar. Time to earn your keep, boy. Trey swallowed hard but nodded. Rachel grabbed a metal pipe from a pile of scavenged weapons near the door. Then let's move. The mission begins. The night air was thick with smoke as they crept down the abandoned streets. Rachel led the way, her movements quick and controlled. Nathan followed, his grip firm on the fire axe he'd scavenged. Trey trailed behind, visibly shaking. The city was a graveyard. Abandoned cars littered the roads, some still running, their headlights casting eerie beams through the darkness. Then came the moans. Nathan froze. A group of zombies lurched in the distance, feasting on a corpse. Rachel signaled for them to move quietly. Trey wasn't as careful. His foot clipped a crushed soda can, the clatter echoing through the dead streets. The zombies' heads snapped toward them. Rachel cursed. Move! They sprinted. The department store was in sight, a massive structure, its glass entrance doors shattered. Inside, darkness swallowed everything. Nathan shoved Trey through the entrance as the undead gave chase. They stumbled through the broken doorway, weaving past toppled shelves. Then Rachel skidded to a stop. Crap, she muttered. Nathan followed her gaze. A dozen zombies lurked inside, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. They hadn't noticed them, yet. Rachel scanned the room. The storage area's in the back. Nathan eyed the zombies. How do we get past them? Trey's voice was barely a whisper. We don't. Rachel clenched her jaw. No choice. She grabbed a can from a fallen shelf and hurled it across the store. It clattered loudly against a register. The zombies twitched, then shuffled toward the sound. Go, Rachel whispered. They moved fast, weaving between overturned shelves and fallen mannequins. The storage door was in sight. Nathan reached it first and yanked the handle. Locked. Damn it, he hissed. Rachel spun around. We don't have time for this. Trey spotted an emergency exit door nearby. What about that? Nathan didn't have time to argue. He ran to the emergency exit and shoved it open, only to stop dead in his tracks. A group of armed survivors stood on the other side. They weren't zombies. But they weren't friendly, either. Their leader, a bald man with a scar across his cheek, smirked. Well, he said, aiming his rifle at Nathan's chest. Looks like we got some new neighbors. Nathan froze, his hands instinctively tightening around his fire axe. The group of armed survivors stared them down, their weapons raised. The leader, a scar-faced man with a confident smirk, stepped forward, sizing them up. Well, this is awkward, he said, tilting his rifle slightly. Didn't expect visitors. Rachel edged closer to Nathan, her grip firm on her metal pipe. Trey, already trembling, barely breathed. Nathan forced himself to stay calm. We're just here for supplies. The scarred man chuckled. Aren't we all? He motioned toward the others, 3 men and a woman, all armed. They were dressed in scavenged gear, some wearing makeshift armor. Hardened survivors. Killers. You work for the military? Rachel asked cautiously. Scarface laughed. Hell no. He gestured at his crew. We don't take orders from anyone. We take what we need. His eyes flicked to Nathan's axe. And right now, we need weapons. Nathan's stomach tightened. So, here's how this plays out, Scarface continued. You drop your weapons, and we let you leave. Nice and simple. Nathan exchanged a look with Rachel. Giving up their weapons meant death. Or worse. Rachel shifted her stance slightly, readying herself. And if we refuse? Scarface sighed. Then we drop you. Nathan's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned. If they fought, they wouldn't last long. But if they ran? The moan of a zombie shattered the tension. One of the undead inside the store turned toward the open door. Scarface barely had time to react before the groans multiplied. The noise had drawn them. "Shit," one of his men cursed. The zombies inside the store surged forward, drawn by the commotion. Nathan acted on instinct. "Run," he shouted. Rachel didn't hesitate. She grabbed Trey and bolted as Nathan swung his axe at the nearest survivor. The blade struck the man's arm, making him howl in pain. Then the zombies crashed through the doorway. Scarface and his group opened fire, but there were too many. The undead swarmed the entrance, their snarling mouths hungry for flesh. Nathan sprinted after Rachel and Trey, dodging past fallen shelves. The emergency exit loomed ahead. They reached it just as a zombie lunged at Trey. Nathan swung his axe, cleaving through its skull. Blood and brain matter splattered across the floor. "Go!" Nathan shouted. Rachel kicked open the door, and they stumbled into the alleyway. Behind them, gunfire and screams filled the store. Scarface's group was fighting for their lives. Nathan wasn't about to stick around to see who won. Regrouping. They ran until their lungs burned. Finally, they ducked into an abandoned gas station. Trey collapsed against a wall, gasping. His face was pale, his whole body shaking. Rachel checked their surroundings, gripping her pipe. "You think they made it out?" Nathan exhaled sharply. "If they did, they won't forget us." Rachel frowned. "Then we need to leave the city. Fast." Nathan rubbed his temples. "No way out." "Maybe," Rachel said. "But we won't survive much longer if we don't do something." Trey finally spoke. "We need to go back." Nathan blinked. "Back?" Trey swallowed hard. "To the store. To the others. We need a real plan." Nathan hesitated. The thought of going back to that boarded-up store, where trust was razor-thin, didn't sit right with him. But what choice did they have? Rachel sighed. "We're running out of options." Nathan exhaled. "Fine. But we move carefully." They crept out of the gas station and made their way back. The streets were eerily silent. The chaos from earlier had drawn zombies away, leaving abandoned cars and corpses in their wake. When they reached the store, Nathan knocked lightly. A shotgun barrel appeared through a crack in the barricade. Dale's voice was cold. "Who's with you?" "Just us," Nathan said. The lock clicked, and the door opened. Dale scanned them quickly before nodding. "Get in." Nathan stepped inside, only to be met with tense stares. Jason looked relieved, but Linda was less welcoming. "You're alive." "Barely," Rachel muttered. Nathan noticed something different. There were new people in the store. A woman and a man, both injured. "Who are they?" Nathan asked. Dale sighed. "Survivors from another group. Said their camp got hit." Linda crossed her arms. "We barely have enough supplies for ourselves." Nathan clenched his jaw. "Then we find more." Rachel nodded. "There's got to be another way out of the city." Dale exhaled. "There is one." Everyone turned toward him. "The subway tunnels," he said. Silence fell over the group. "The tunnels are sealed," Linda argued. Dale shook his head. "Not all of them. If we can find a way through, we might make it out." Jason frowned. "That's a hell of a risk." "It's better than waiting to die," Nathan said. Dale nodded. "Then we move at dawn." Nathan looked around at the group. This was it. Their only shot. He just hoped they weren't already too late. Nathan barely slept. None of them did. The store was silent, except for the occasional cough or the rustling of someone shifting position. Every noise outside, the distant moan of the undead, the echo of gunfire in the far distance, reminded them how little time they had left. At dawn, they moved. Dale led the way, shotgun at the ready, as they slipped out the back door. The streets were eerily empty, but no one let their guard down. Rachel walked beside Nathan, keeping a firm grip on Emily's hand. The little girl hadn't spoken much since the night before. Jason stayed close to his daughter, his expression hard with determination. Linda, Ben, Carrie, and Trey followed, the group moving quickly through the ruined city. The subway entrance was only 5 blocks away. 5 blocks of hell. Into the tunnels. They moved cautiously, ducking behind abandoned cars and burned-out buildings. Smoke lingered in the air, and the distant roar of flames painted the sky in a sickly orange hue. The undead were out there. Watching. Waiting. But they weren't the only ones lurking in the ruins. Nathan spotted fresh footprints in the dust near a smashed storefront. Human. They weren't alone. Dale noticed, too. We need to move. They reached the subway entrance, a rusted metal gate, half buried in debris. Dale and Jason pried it open while Nathan kept watch. Rachel hesitated. Are we sure about this? Nathan glanced at the city behind them, where the sun was beginning to rise over the broken skyline. A single gunshot rang out in the distance. We don't have a choice, he said. One by one, they slipped into the darkness. What lurks below? The air was thick with the scent of rot and mildew. Their flashlights barely cut through the suffocating blackness as they moved deeper into the tunnels. Ben and Carrie clung to each other, their eyes darting around. Trey gripped his bat tightly, his knuckles white. Emily clung to her father's arm. Nathan felt something unsettling about this place. It wasn't just the smell. It was the silence. The further they went, the quieter everything became. Then Dale stopped abruptly. Nathan nearly walked into him. What? He whispered. Dale shone his flashlight ahead. The tunnel was blocked. A pile of bodies lay stacked against the wall, human remains, twisted and mangled, as if something had dragged them here. The stench was unbearable. Linda gagged. Jesus Christ. Rachel crouched, examining the corpses. Some of these are fresh. Jason tensed. Meaning whatever did this is still down here. A sound echoed from the darkness ahead. Not a moan. Something else. Something breathing. Nathan's stomach tightened. We need to go. Dale nodded. Find another tunnel. They turned back the way they came. Then the shrieking started. A shape lunged from the shadows. Not a zombie. Something worse. The mutants. It moved faster than any zombie Nathan had seen. A hunched, emaciated creature, its skin stretched thin over sharp bones. Its eyes were black voids, its mouth lined with jagged, too many teeth. It climbed the walls like an insect, skittering toward them with unnatural speed. Run! Dale shouted. The creature lunged. Dale fired. The shotgun blast tore into it, but the thing barely slowed down. Trey screamed. Nathan grabbed him, shoving him forward. Move! The group sprinted. The mutant shrieked again, the sound echoing through the tunnels. More sounds answered from the dark. Oh, hell no, Linda gasped. More of them were coming. Nathan's heart pounded as they ran blindly through the tunnels, the creatures in pursuit. The mutants were faster. Smarter. Rachel yanked Emily into a side passage, Jason right behind them. Nathan followed, grabbing Ben and Carrie as they stumbled. Trey tripped. Nathan spun, grabbing him, just as one of the creatures lunged. A second shotgun blast blew it off its feet. Dale! Go! The older man yelled. They didn't stop running. Finally, they reached a service door. Nathan yanked it open, and they tumbled inside. Jason slammed it shut. The creatures screeched, pounding against the metal. But they didn't break through. Not yet. Silence fell again. Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears. Ben collapsed against the wall, gasping. Trey was crying. Rachel checked Emily, who clung to her like a lifeline. Dale leaned against the door, his face grim. What the hell were those? Nathan swallowed hard. Not zombies. Rachel exhaled sharply. They were evolving. Linda wiped blood from her hands. Jesus, just kill me now. Jason turned his flashlight toward the room they had taken refuge in. It wasn't empty. Files and broken computers were scattered across the space. A shattered window looked into an abandoned lab. A logo was stamped on the wall. Nathan's stomach twisted. It was a pharmaceutical symbol. Rachel stared at it. No way. Dale turned. You know this place? Rachel hesitated. I think this is where it started. Jason frowned. The outbreak? Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. No. The experiments. Nathan's breath hitched. They hadn't just stumbled into any part of the tunnels. They had found the source. And something was still down here. Watching. Waiting. Silence hung heavy in the darkened room, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. The mutants outside had stopped shrieking, but Nathan knew better than to assume they were gone. They were waiting. Jason turned his flashlight toward the shattered glass window leading into the abandoned lab. Dust-coated monitors sat motionless, their screens cracked. Papers and medical equipment were scattered across the floor, frozen in time as if the researchers had fled in a hurry. Dale reloaded his shotgun. If this is where it started, we need to keep moving. Rachel's eyes stayed fixed on the pharmaceutical logo on the far wall. I've seen this before, she murmured. Nathan frowned. Where? Rachel hesitated. Before the outbreak, there were rumors about secret government-backed labs. Some said they were experimenting on bioweapons. Others believed they were working on a cure for something worse than the virus itself. She looked at the shattered glass, her voice unsteady. This might be proof. Trey swallowed hard. You're saying they made the zombies? Rachel shook her head. No. I think they were trying to control them. A chill crept down Nathan's spine. Jason exhaled sharply. So what the hell happened? Linda kicked aside a broken clipboard. Obviously, they lost control. A faint hissing sound echoed from deeper in the lab. Everyone froze. What was that? Carrie whispered. Nathan lifted his axe, stepping toward the window. The light from his flashlight caught through the darkness, illuminating a figure slumped against the far wall. It was a scientist. Or what was left of one. His lab coat was stained dark with dried blood, his face frozen in an expression of agony. A keycard hung around his neck. Nathan grimaced. Might be useful. Dale grunted. I'll cover you. Nathan climbed through the broken window, his boots crunching on glass. The air was thick with the scent of decay, but something else lingered, something chemical. He crouched next to the body and reached for the keycard. Then the scientist moved. Nathan barely had time to react before the corpse's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with an iron grip. Shit, he yelled. The scientist's eyes snapped open, milky white, but filled with awareness. It wasn't like the others. It was different. Rachel and Dale leaped through the window as the scientist let out a horrifying rasp, its mouth stretching wider than humanly possible. Nathan ripped free just as the thing lunged. Dale fired. The shotgun blast tore into the scientist's chest, but it didn't stop. Rachel swung her metal pipe, cracking it across the skull. The scientist shrieked but didn't go down. Nathan buried his axe into its forehead. The creature froze, then collapsed. Silence returned. Rachel's hands trembled. That wasn't a normal zombie. Nathan pulled his axe free, his breathing ragged. No. It wasn't. Jason and the others climbed through the window. Trey stared at the scientist's body, wide-eyed. What the hell was that? Nathan held up the keycard. Hopefully, this gets us answers. Dale nodded. Then let's move. The hidden chamber. Using the keycard, they accessed a restricted section of the lab. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The walls were lined with shattered glass chambers, their contents long since escaped. Strange claw marks gouged the steel doors. Rachel's flashlight landed on a rusted metal plaque. The words sent a shiver through Nathan's spine. Project Revenant, Phase 3. Jason frowned. Project Revenant? Rachel's expression darkened. I've heard of this. It was supposed to be a regeneration experiment, an attempt to revive dead cells. She glanced at the destroyed lab around them. Clearly, it worked too well. Nathan's gut twisted. You're saying they weren't trying to make zombies? Rachel shook her head. They were trying to bring back the dead, without the side effects. Linda scoffed. Well, they failed. Nathan's eyes drifted to a metal door at the end of the hall. It was different from the others, reinforced, sealed tight. A biohazard symbol was painted across it. Dale glanced at Nathan. What do you think? Nathan took a deep breath. I think whatever's behind that door is what they were really afraid of. Jason tested the handle. Locked. Rachel held up the keycard. Let's find out why. She swiped it. The lock clicked. The door hissed open. The final experiment. A chill swept over them as they stepped inside. The room was massive, lined with containment units, most of them shattered. In the center stood a single pod. Unlike the others, this one was intact. Frost covered the glass, and inside, something moved. A figure lay suspended in cryogenic fluid. Human. Or close to it. A heartbeat monitor flickered on. Beep. 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 Jason stepped back. No. No, no, no. Nathan read the label on the pod. His blood ran cold. Prototype Omega, Stage V. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. They didn't stop the virus. Nathan swallowed hard. They perfected it. The pod's lock disengaged. A mechanical hiss filled the air as the chamber began to open. The figure inside stirred. A single, inhuman eye snapped open, fixing on them. Then it moved. The last thing Nathan heard before the lights flickered out was the sound of shattering glass. And the beginning of a growl. The moment the glass shattered, the room was plunged into chaos. A wave of freezing mist spilled from the broken pod, curling around Nathan's feet like grasping fingers. The air hummed with electricity as warning lights flickered red. Then, it stepped out. A figure, tall, impossibly lean, and disturbingly human, emerged from the mist. Nathan's grip tightened on his axe. His breath turned to frost in the sudden chill. The creature looked at them. Not with the empty, mindless stare of a zombie. But with intelligence. Its exposed skin was a sickly gray, stretched over dense muscle. Its eyes were pitch black, reflecting the emergency lights like a void. Tubes and surgical scars covered its body, remnants of whatever monstrosity had created it. Then, it moved. Before anyone could react, the prototype Omega was gone, a blur of motion as it crossed the distance between them in seconds. Jason barely had time to raise his gun before the creature ripped it from his hands and threw him across the room. Jason's body slammed against a control panel, sending sparks flying. Emily screamed. Dale fired a shotgun at point-blank range. The shells hit, but Omega barely flinched. The monster snapped its head toward Dale, moving almost curiously. Then, faster than any human could track, it reached out and grabbed the barrel of the shotgun. With a sickening crack, it bent the metal like paper. Dale stumbled back, his face pale. Holy hell! Omega's gaze shifted toward Rachel. Rachel froze. And then, it spoke. You do not belong here. The voice was wrong, a deep, distorted echo that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Nathan's stomach twisted. It can talk? Omega turned toward him next. Its eyes locked onto Nathan's axe, its head tilting slightly. It smiled. A horrible, twisted grin that stretched too wide for something pretending to be human. Then, it attacked. Surviving the unstoppable. Omega lunged, its movements so fast that it blurred. Nathan barely dodged before a hand slammed into the steel door behind him, leaving a crater-sized dent. "Move!" Rachel screamed. Carrie and Ben were already pulling Emily toward the exit. Linda dragged Jason to his feet, his face twisted in pain. Nathan swung his axe, a perfect strike to the creature's skull. But the blade barely bit into Omega's skin. Nathan had just enough time to see it heal before the monster backhanded him. The impact sent him flying across the room. Pain exploded in his ribs as he crashed into a metal table. Omega didn't stop. It grabbed Dale by the throat, lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Dale gasped, his boots kicking against the floor. Omega studied him. Weak. Rachel moved before she could think. She grabbed a scalpel from the table and stabbed it into Omega's exposed side. Omega's head snapped toward her. Rachel's blood ran cold. Then, Omega dropped Dale. The older man collapsed, gasping. Omega turned fully to Rachel. "You are different." Rachel's hands shook. Omega leaned in, its black eyes scanning her face. Then, suddenly, it stopped. A flicker of recognition crossed its expression. Rachel saw it. And Omega knew she had. She took a slow step back. "You." Omega moved. Rachel barely had time to react before Omega's hand was around her throat, lifting her off the ground. The experiment's truth. Rachel clawed at Omega's grip, gasping. "Put her down." Jason roared, trying to raise his pistol. Before he could fire, Omega tightened its hold. Rachel choked, vision swimming. Then, Omega dropped her. She collapsed, coughing, lungs burning. Omega stared at her for a long moment. Then, in that same distorted, vibrating voice, it said, "You are one of them." Silence. Rachel's body went rigid. Nathan, still struggling to get up, stared at her. "What?" Rachel's face paled. She knew something. Omega tilted its head again. Then, it stepped away from them. Linda, gripping her crowbar, whispered, "What the hell is going on?" Rachel slowly got to her feet, eyes locked on Omega. "You remember me?" Omega blinked, something strange flashing in its dark eyes. Then, suddenly, a siren blared. A mechanical voice filled the lab. "Warning. Prototype Omega has been breached. Facility purge initiated." Nathan's breath hitched. "Purge?" The sound of gas releasing from vents echoed through the lab. Omega snarled, looking up. Then, it did something none of them expected. It turned away, and ran. Jason blinked. Did that thing just leave? Ben pointed toward the door. "Guys. Not to ruin the moment, but we need to go." Nathan grabbed Rachel's arm. "What the hell was that about? What did it mean?" Rachel didn't answer. She just swallowed hard. Then, without a word, she ran. Nathan and the others followed, fleeing the lab as the purge alarm screamed. Behind them, something deeper rumbled, something beneath the lab waking up. And as they reached the tunnels, escaping into the city, Nathan realized one thing. Omega knew Rachel. And worse, Rachel knew Omega. And she was hiding the truth. The city streets were eerily silent as Nathan, Rachel, and the others sprinted from the lab's underground exit. The purge alarms had stopped, but the sense of dread remained. Nathan's ribs ached from the hit he took earlier, but that was the least of his concerns. Rachel was hiding something. And it had something to do with Omega. "Keep moving!" Jason shouted, helping Dale along. They cut through an alley, keeping low as they moved between abandoned cars. Trey's breathing was ragged. "Where the hell do we even go? That thing just tore through everything." Rachel suddenly stopped. Everyone nearly crashed into her. Nathan grabbed her shoulder. "Rachel, what the hell are you?" She turned to face him, her eyes filled with fear. "I need to tell you the truth." Nathan stared at her, chest rising and falling. "About Omega?" She nodded. Jason cursed. "Now? We don't have time for..." A sound cut through the night. A slow, steady footstep. Then another. And another. Nathan turned toward the main road. His stomach twisted. Omega stood in the middle of the street, watching them. Its black eyes flickered in the dim light. Its body was completely healed, not a single wound left. And then, it smiled again. Rachel's grip tightened around Nathan's wrist. "We have to run." But Nathan was done running. No. Not this time. The final stand. Omega moved first. One moment, it was in the street. The next, it was a blur of motion, closing the distance between them in seconds. Nathan barely had time to dodge before Omega's fist crashed into the pavement, sending a spiderweb of cracks through the concrete. Dale fired his last shotgun shell, direct hit to the head, but Omega didn't even flinch. Jason fired next, 4 rounds into its chest. Nothing. Omega's eyes locked onto Rachel. Nathan stepped in front of her, raising his axe. Omega cocked its head. Then, it spoke again. "You were supposed to save us." Rachel's breath hitched. Nathan's eyes widened. "What?" Omega's face twisted, not in rage, but in something else. Desperation. "You promised." Rachel froze. And Nathan saw something in her expression, something close to guilt. Jason shouted, "We are not dying here." Omega suddenly lunged at Rachel. Nathan acted on instinct. He swung his axe with everything he had. The blade connected, burying itself deep into Omega's shoulder. Omega staggered back. For the first time since its awakening, it looked shocked. Nathan refused to let it recover. He twisted the blade, forcing it deeper. Omega let out a snarl, its black eyes locking onto Nathan. It lifted a hand to strike. Bang! A shot rang out. Rachel had fired. The bullet hit Omega in the head. For a brief moment, the monster froze. And then, Omega stumbled back. Its gaze flickered. The black void in its eyes shifted, just for a second. And in that second, it looked afraid. Then, its body gave out. Omega collapsed onto its knees, one hand pressed against its head. The street fell silent. Rachel slowly lowered the gun, her hands trembling. Nathan pulled his axe free, stumbling back. Omega, the unstoppable prototype, did not move. It just sat there. Breathing. Bleeding. And for the first time, it looked human. "Rachel," Nathan whispered. Rachel swallowed. And then, finally, she told the truth. The truth behind Omega. Rachel's voice was quiet. "I was supposed to be part of Project Revenant." The world tilted. Nathan felt like the air had been sucked from his lungs. Jason shook his head. "No. That's impossible." Rachel kept going. "I wasn't a scientist. I was a volunteer. We were supposed to develop a cure, something that would stop the virus permanently." Nathan's fingers clenched around his axe. "And Omega?" Rachel's gaze fell on the broken figure in the street. "He was supposed to be the cure." Omega lifted its head. Its voice was faint. "You abandoned me." Rachel closed her eyes. "They told me you were dead." Omega's breathing slowed. Its fingers curled into fists. "I remember now." The monster staggered to its feet. Nathan tensed. But Omega didn't attack. It just stood there, watching Rachel. Then, without a word, Omega turned away. It vanished into the darkness, leaving them behind. Aftermath. No one spoke for a long time. Rachel finally broke the silence. What now? Nathan took a deep breath. The city stretched before them, burning, broken, but still standing. The virus is still out there. He met her gaze. And Omega is still alive. Rachel nodded. He won't stop. Not until he finds the answers he's looking for. Jason exhaled. So what do we do? Nathan adjusted his grip on his axe. We find a way to end this. Rachel looked toward the city. Then, without another word, she walked forward. Nathan and the others followed. The city of the dead wasn't finished with them yet. But they were ready. End of story.